guys, it's Jen. This is another episode of Reframing Me, and I'm your host, Dr. Jennifer Brubaker. Thank you so much for being here today. I am so grateful to have this space to come to on days like today. And I hope that you all know that this is a place that you can come because Reframing Me is a space for us, for women who are, most of us are raising teenagers, and that brings a whole bunch of different challenges along with it. And at the same time as trying to relearn how to be a mom, we are also trying to rediscover who we are as women. And that can feel lonely and solitary and overwhelming at times. And so Reframing Me is a place that we can come together to kind of just work through some of those things. I am not recording video today. I will tell you that because currently you would be frightened. If you saw me, I look homeless. I don't know if there's a better word for it. I look homeless. I actually have a hair appointment later. And so my hair clearly is a disaster, but I am not only in my glasses, which y'all know how I feel about wearing my glasses, but I am in an old giant sweater covering an old giant t-shirt and not even my sweatpants. Sweatpants would be fancy pants right now, but no, I have pajama pants on. So it is early in the morning, and I don't typically record early in the morning, but this was supposed to be done yesterday, and it was supposed to be done the day prior, and probably the day prior if I really did the math, but hadn't gotten to it. Anyways, we're here now, and that is all that matters. Now, y'all know if you've been here for a minute, you know that I have mentioned in the past my dad and how my dad is our biggest, most loyalist listener. And despite the fact that he certainly doesn't fit any of our target audience demographics, he is still my biggest loyalist fan. Well, unfortunately, a few days ago, my dad had a stroke. And so he is currently in the hospital recovering from that. So, needless to say, that has definitely kind of thrown a monkey wrench into all of my work plans and the rest of everything. Thankfully, I'm so grateful to tell you that he is doing really, really well. And he has actually been moved out of like intensive care and the critical care. And now he is just basically waiting to move into rehab. So we are very grateful that he's doing so well. But I do have to have some backstock of podcasts for him to catch up on when he is feeling better. So that's what we're here to do today. We are here to record an episode. In case I forget, I sometimes need a reminder, I guess, of what I am here to do. But today we are talking about emotional intelligence. And it's interesting. I think sometimes we forget, and I know that I have really been on it over and over and over again for the last like 6 weeks about gratitude and this gratitude practice. But I have to say that facing this situation with my dad right now, that I cannot tell you how how grateful I am for gratitude. Isn't that funny? But I cannot tell you, I can't figure out a better way to say that either. I cannot tell you how grateful I am for this gratitude practice that I have worked so hard on and developed over the last number of weeks here, because it has thoroughly shifted my perspective, which is interesting because there is such a concept in gratitude and in a gratitude practice that what you look for is what you see. And just like, if you get a new color car, and next thing you know, you are seeing that color car everywhere, or you're seeing that type of car that you just got everywhere. And it's like, how did I miss all that before? Were these always here? But your perspective makes you're looking for that. And so you're seeing it. And so ever since I've really started to look for the good, look for what I am grateful for in a situation, that is what I am seeing. And this entire journey here now, well, it's only the beginning of the journey, but this beginning of the journey with my dad has made me realize that that is so true. It's not being toxically positive. It's not saying, oh, this is great. Yeah, I'm so excited for this opportunity to get to have my dad in the hospital. That's not what it is. You're not trying to be toxically positive. It's recognizing that there are negatives. Absolutely. This is not ideal. This is not what you want. And recognizing that, but at the same time, you're able to then put your focus on all that is actually good, all that is actually positive, all that you are actually grateful for, because there is so much of it. And so that ability to shift your perspective towards that is so very important. And when you start to look for that, you start to see more of it, just like everything else, whether it's a color car or a topic for a podcast, which is interesting because I had been wanting to talk about perspective and this perspective switch. And then all of a sudden, everywhere I look, I'm like, everybody's talking about perspective. Everybody's talking about what perspective is and what perspective and looking at a situation through perspective means. Similarly, I had planned to talk about emotional intelligence, mainly because I told you that I am listening to a podcast book club, and the book last month was The Magic. And in February, now it's the Mel Robbins Let Them book. And I have fallen behind in every aspect of my life. I have fallen behind, but I have definitely fallen behind in reading the book. So now I am cheating and I am only listening to the podcast. So I'm getting the gist of it. I'm not reading the book anymore. I kind of put a pin in that one, but I am listening to it. And so I can't make a very clear or thoughtful judgment on the book itself because of the fact that, hey, I'm not really reading the book. But as far as the theory, I definitely subscribe to the theory to some degree. I think that it's basic, I guess is a way to put it, which is on one hand, like, yeah, that it's really basic. We can all use it in every situation. And I don't think we can all use it in every situation. And since, of course, I have been taking part in this book club and there's a corresponding Facebook page and people are just throwing around, let them for everything, when it's like, well, you can't really just use it for everything, but it is a very valuable tool to have in your tool belt to look at things, just to let someone do what they want to do, let them think what they want to think, let them experience what they are going to experience, and then you make decisions about yourself based on then how you feel about it or what you want to do. And so it is a very valuable perspective to kind of have, like I said, in your tool belt to pull out when you need something. But one of the topics that she does address in it is emotional intelligence, which when I was listening to that part, I thought, this is something that I have kind of had in the back of my head that we should talk about, because as parents raising teenagers, it is one of our biggest jobs, really, to teach them emotional intelligence, because it is so important to their futures and their future relationships. And many of us are really ill-equipped to do that because we oftentimes are not necessarily as emotionally intelligent as we should be and as good at managing our emotions as we should be. And so I think it's a very important to talk about. Ironically, then, I told you I'm working on a certification and I meet with this group periodically, and we met last night. And of course, what were we talking about? First of all, she talked about perspective, which I'm like, yeah, everybody's talking about perspective because now I plan to talk about perspective. And so I'm seeing it everywhere. And then the next thing, emotional intelligence. So yeah, that totally fit too. So not only did it verify my what you look for, you will see, So our gratitude, again, look for good things, you will see good things, but then also this idea of emotional intelligence being important to talk about. And so that's what we're going to have our conversation about today. We're talking about emotional intelligence, managing emotions, and then how all of this connects to our teens and to teen brain development. And you are probably thinking, I was never taught how to handle emotions. And you are not alone, because most of us who grew up in, say, like the 80s, the 90s, we were not taught emotions. We were not taught emotional intelligence. And look around, it shows, right? But we can totally break that cycle. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. It's a conversation that matters, not just for our kids, but for us too. And emotional intelligence, it's a skill. And just like any other skill, it can be learned. And in order to learn something, we often have to be able to recognize where we currently stand, what our baseline is, and where we fall short. Emotional intelligence is being aware of how you're thinking and how you're feeling. And it's very hard to shift what you're thinking and how you're feeling if you're unaware of your emotions. But then, if you can be aware and you can recognize, then you have the power to choose. You have the power of choice about what you do with that information that you find. Maybe you create stories around that emotion, and maybe you hang on to those stories for dear life. Or maybe you just let it go and you move on. One of the interesting things that I picked up in that book, or in the podcast about that book, but one of the interesting things that I picked up was that emotions themselves, they only last for like 90 seconds. So 90 seconds they last. And after that, the only reason that we continue feeling the emotion is because of those stories that we tell ourselves about that emotion. So the emotion itself, it passes, it's over with. But now we hang on to all of the things that we're telling ourselves about the story about the emotion. And so she describes it in Let Them as being like a wave. And so the emotion hits us and it comes to us like a wave, and it builds up and builds up and builds up. And if we can just recognize it and we can feel it and just let ourselves feel it, then that wave, it passes and it's over with. So we have felt the emotion, we have experienced what came from the emotion, and then we let the emotion go. We let it pass us and we move on. And that is an emotionally intelligent way of handling that. Unfortunately, most of us, myself included, most of us, we feel the emotion and we get very tied to the emotion. Now, some of us deal with that emotion by trying to cope, trying to self soothe, trying to numb the emotion with maybe alcohol or drugs or working out. Hey, hi, that's me. Or yelling or crying. That's probably me too. But that we try to manage the emotion that way. And so instead of that, if we can just recognize that, hey, it's there, feel it, and then let it go. Now, others of us too, and some probably overlap, also deal with that emotion by wrapping ourselves in stories about it. What does this mean? How does it make us feel about ourselves? How does it make us feel about the people around us? How does it make us feel about the world or our relationships? And we just wrap it up into these stories that we just keep going with instead of just letting it go. So, like, if you are stuck in traffic and someone cuts you off, okay? Your initial surge of anger, they cut you off. You're mad. And so that anger, feel it. It lasts like a minute and a half tops. But how many times do you let something silly like that, somebody cutting you off or something spilling your coffee or somebody having your trash can put in the wrong place or some silly little thing like that, that we get hung up on and we mentally replay it over and over and over in our head. People are so inconsiderate, or people are only out for themselves these days. People are so mean. Why does this always happen to me? Why is life so unfair? Why am I always the one who has this? All of these narratives that we tell ourselves, they keep us stuck in the emotion very long after it should have passed. So many times we end up letting one incident impact the entirety of our day. And it's things like, why does this always happen to me? But it keeps us stuck. And if we struggle with this, us as adults, which I know I do, I think that I am pretty aware of my emotions and I am pretty aware of managing my emotions. And yet I still struggle with this at times. And if I do, and if we do as adults who are aware, imagine how hard it is for our teens, for kids whose brains are still developing and still trying to learn how to regulate their emotions in the first place. So I thought that that's what we can do today. We can kind of have this conversation about how we can manage our emotions better and teach them to do the same thing. We might ask, why weren't we taught emotional intelligence? And that's a fair question, but really it comes down to that generational cycle. Our parents weren't taught it, so they didn't teach it to us. It's not because they didn't care to teach it, but it's because emotional intelligence just wasn't something that people thought about or talked about or taught their kids in past generations. If you look back at our grandparents' generation, their relationships, they followed very strict societal rules. Emotional expression, especially emotional expression for men, but emotional expression in general was almost non-existent. Women were just expected to be the caregivers, to hold everything together, and to just sit back and accept whatever emotions were thrown at them. And that's why, and I know oftentimes I hear about, past generations valued marriage so much more and they stuck it out through the hard times and divorce rate was low and all of the narratives that go along with that. But if you think about it, they didn't really have a lot of choice, did they? Women didn't have, for the most part, the financial ability to leave a marriage. And so they didn't have the ability to get a credit card. They didn't have the ability to have a good income. They oftentimes didn't have the ability for further education. And so they were stuck in a relationship where their emotional needs were oftentimes put aside just because they had to survive. So the men weren't taught that it was okay to have emotions. And so, or to notice their emotions and to manage their emotions. And we know when I say about having emotions, we're not talking about anger, because we all know that anger has been rebranded as not being an emotion. Good rebrand, really, on the part of anger. Chef's kiss. But men were not taught to have emotions and to manage them. And so they were expressing them in unhealthy ways to women. And then women, in order to survive, they had to put their emotional needs aside. And so that kind of is this cycle that societally we were in, which really doesn't lead to us knowing much about it and much about how to handle it. There was also a very strong emphasis on doing rather than on feeling. Work hard, provide for your family, get through the day. Emotional regulation was not even something on the radar. If you were upset, you just pushed through it. If you were struggling, you didn't talk about it. And men in particular were raised with the message that emotions, except for anger, were a sign of weakness. And then our parents, well, they grew up with that model. And yes, things kind of were shifting a bit by the time we were kids, but emotional literacy was still not being explicitly recognized and thought. And instead, we had our emotions oftentimes dismissed. Oh, stop crying. Or, you're fine. Go to school, you'll feel better. Toughen up. All of those things that might sound familiar to us, those are the things that we grew up with when we would feel something. And so, what did that end up teaching us? It taught us that emotions were inconvenient to have, that they were weaknesses, and that the best way to deal with them was just to shove them down, to self soothe with something that's oftentimes a really bad habit, to just ignore them. And most of those things then would lead to eventually exploding when they get to be too big to contain. And now here we are trying to raise teenagers who really need help understanding their emotions, and we weren't given the tools ourselves. We're kind of needing to learn emotional intelligence on the fly while we are also trying to teach it. So, in addition to everything else we deal with, I can't imagine why that is overwhelming to us, right? Now, the effects of not learning emotional intelligence in our childhood have extended oftentimes well into our adulthood, right? So, I mean, just think about how many of our conflicts, whether it's with your partner or a friend or someone at work or just someone on the street, but how many of them stem from misunderstandings about emotions. We often don't know how to recognize or how to regulate our own emotions, much less try to navigate the ones that the people around us are having. So, like in marriage, how often do couples argue because one person feels like they are being unheard, or that they are being dismissed? The way they feel about something is being ignored. If we weren't taught how to express our emotions in a way that fosters an understanding of other people's needs, an understanding of other people's presence, of their emotions, then we may instead resort to passive aggressiveness or to avoidance or having emotional explosions. And this then creates a distance and a resentment in our relationships. And for many of us, emotional suppression was totally normalized. And for men, especially, anger, the only acceptable emotion, everything else being suppressed. And this is why so many men struggle to express any degree of sadness or vulnerability or fear, because they were never given the tools to do this. And then for women, other side of the spectrum, right? We were often labeled as being too emotional, right? I say we're often labeled, but we are often labeled as being too emotional, because if we express sadness or frustration, we were overreacting. If we feel deeply about something, we are being dramatic. So we learned that we either needed to suppress our emotions or express them, but in a way that didn't threaten the comfort of the people around us. And so it is no surprise that many of us then find ourselves in relationships where one partner is dismissive of emotions while the other feels like it's a struggle to even be heard. Now, before we can teach that emotional intelligence to our kids, we need to work on it ourselves. And that means we need to be able to develop a self awareness and actively practice emotional regulations. And so I thought that we could kind of have a discussion today, 5 different steps towards emotional regulation. Number one, name your emotion. Not like name it, Sally. No, I mean, I guess you could, right? Every time that you feel like the movie, like the Inside Out movie, we could name your emotions that way. But that is not what I meant when I wrote down name your emotions on this list. But name your emotions, because simply identifying what you're feeling is a powerful first step. So instead of saying, I'm just in a bad mood today. No, identify what's underneath that. Why are you in a bad mood? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Yes. Are you feeling frustrated? A bit. Are you feeling disappointed? No, I'm not feeling disappointed. But name what it is, not just, oh, I'm having a bad day. No, what about it? What are you feeling that's causing you to feel like you're having a bad day? Not, I'm in a bad mood. No, why? What is the precipice of this bad mood? There is an emotion at the bottom of it. What is that? Name it. If you want to name it Sally, go ahead and name it Sally. But realistically, is it frustration? Is it overwhelmedness? What is it? Number two, pause before reacting. Practice that pause. When you feel the emotion well up inside of you, give yourself those 90 seconds before responding. That'll give you time to name it, recognize it, and then ask yourself if what you're about to say or what you're about to do is truly in line with your values of what you want in the relationship and what you want in the interaction. Number three, challenge the narrative. Now, if the emotion itself lingers beyond that 90 seconds, that's when you need to step back and you need to examine the narrative that you're telling yourself about it. What is the story that now you have built around that emotion? Is it based on facts or is it based on assumptions? So you might have disappointment well up inside of you and you recognize that. And then now here you are, a few minutes after the fact, an hour after the fact, and you are still dwelling on that disappointment. You are beating yourself up about a failure or such. Challenge that. Ask questions. Are you really a failure or is it something else? Did you experience a disappointment because of some type of rejection? Or are you now hanging on to this story that you've created that you are a failure because of that? Are you making assumptions about the incident that happened that made you angry? You know, we were driving the other day, and this is totally an aside. And actually, it's funny because I think that this is is this what got me thinking about perspective event originally? Maybe. But we were driving. My parents live they claim 20 minutes from us. It's not 20 minutes from us. And I drive probably faster than they do, and it's not 20 minutes from us. It's easily closer to 25 maybe even with traffic, maybe even 30. So when my mom called me the other day that something was wrong, of course, we hopped in the car and we hurried over there. But of course, perspective, I guess, we had every single light, every bit of traffic, everything. And so I had my daughter and one of the boys in the car with me. And we finally made it to their subdivision, which is like the longest road in the world to get to their house on it. I swear, it's like, I'm not being exaggerating. It's probably like a mile and a half to 2 miles down into the subdivision that you finally get to their house. And of course, it's like, I think a 35 or whatever to get there. And so we were behind people going so slow. Like they were, I'm not kidding, they were like easily going under 35. We commented that they were going under 35. And so they had nowhere to be. And so I was like following right behind them. Well, my kids are like, just go around them, just go around them. And I was worried because it's like a curvy road. And so I didn't want to like fly around them. And I was worried about who was coming up the other way. And then eventually I saw that it was kind of clear. And so I like zoomed around them. And of course, that was not met with smiles and sunshine and rainbows, right? Obviously, not only the two cars that I passed, but a car then that ended up coming in the other direction towards me. Of course, they're honking their horns and they're like giving me mean hand gestures and just all up in arms about it. And my daughter said later, and it's funny because she said it a number of times because it really, really resonated with her. She said how none of those people who were mean in the car, none of them had any idea what we were doing. None of them knew that we weren't just impatient to get home. They looked at us like we were doing something bad when in actuality, they didn't know that we were in an emergency situation, that we were hurrying to get to someone who we loved who was struggling. And they didn't realize how important it was for us to get there quickly and that they were kind of standing in the way of us getting there. And so they took it personally. They took it hurtfully. They took it like we were doing something wrong. And so they lashed out in anger. And we probably moved on and they were still honking horns. They were still probably gesturing to themselves in the car or talking to the person who was with them about us and probably writing down my license number or whatever to report me to the HOA. But they didn't know the situation. And like she was saying, and it is so true that you don't think about things in that way from that person's perspective. They had no idea that this was going on. And how many times are we faced with people in life that we make judgments or we get angry about or who frustrate us when we don't know the situation that is causing it. And so oftentimes we make assumptions based on what we see, but that's not necessarily the truth. And so if one of those people, which I guarantee you, there were like 3 cars, I guarantee you that one of those people was angry afterwards still at us, that we had long moved on from it and they were still angry about it. Was it more than 90 seconds? Absolutely. But they probably built up a narrative in their head that kept the emotion lingering because they didn't base it on facts. They didn't know what was going on. They based it on their assumptions about me, about my car, about my speed, about all different types of things. If they had known that I was hurrying to reach my parents because my mom had called me crying that something was wrong with my dad and I was trying to get there as quickly as possible, I think they would probably have given me a pass and they might have been nicer about it. but they don't know that. And so instead, they're just continuing to be angry based on the stories that they're telling themselves. And step 4, practice emotional expression. Now, this doesn't mean venting every feeling that you have at a full intensity. It means learning to express your emotions in a way that instead promotes understanding and a connection with the person who you are experiencing the emotional with. So maybe it's empathy, or maybe it's recognizing what they're saying to you, imagining their perspective. But practice expressing your emotion in a way that is healthy and that makes a connection with the people that you are encountering. Step 5, model healthy coping mechanisms. The best way for us to teach our children healthy emotional regulation is for us to do it ourselves. So when they see us taking those deep breaths, or rather, when they hear me with my yoga breathing and they're always like, what's wrong? Like, they hear it, they see it, they know that we're doing this. When they see us talking things through, when they see us being calm, being rational, when they see us seeking healthy outlets for our emotions. So, yes, exercise, working out, I might feel like sometimes maybe that's trying to numb my emotions, but no, it's actually good. You know, exercise, journaling, those are the healthy ways, having a conversation, healthy ways to manage your emotions. If you can model that, then they will learn that that's the way to do it. So, yes, modeling, absolutely. But how can we also teach our teens to build their own emotional intelligence? Well, we validate their feelings. That is so important. I have mentioned that numerous times on various episodes. Let them know that their feelings, they're okay, instead of telling them to calm down, right? Because calm down, the words calm down have literally never in the history of the world ever calmed anybody down, right? But instead of telling them calm down, say, I see that you're really frustrated. Do you want to talk about it? Or that sounds very hard. What do you think about it? That is frustrating for you to have to deal with. I know that you're very upset right now. Don't dismiss their feelings just because maybe you don't feel the same or you can't even understand why they would feel. Or from your vantage point as a full grown, mature adult, you realize that what they're feeling isn't a big deal. But just because it's not a big deal to you or from your perspective, that doesn't make it not a big deal to them. So validate their feelings. I mean, this doesn't matter if you're talking about a teenager or you're talking about a toddler. Toddlers' feelings are just as valid as a teenager's feelings are. And teenagers' feelings are just as valid as our feelings are. Let them feel it and explain to them that you understand how they're feeling. You understand, and it's okay for them to feel that way, but then we're going to need to move past that. Help them name, like I said, we needed to name our emotions, but we have to explain to them and help them be able to recognize and label and name what they're feeling. You are upset. Are you feeling disappointed? Are you feeling anger? Are you feeling frustrated? Any of those kind of labels that we can get them to be able to recognize in themselves, it can go a long way. So we're validating that what they feel is valid. validate what they're feeling is valid. There's a lot of valids in that same sentence, but we're validating their feelings. We're helping them to identify and put that label on what it is they're feeling. We need to encourage them to use techniques to regulate their emotions. Basically, that 90-second rule, right? Explain to them and teach them that these emotions, they do come and go, and that we need to just kind of learn to regulate the emotions with deep breathing or being mindful or taking a break or walking out of the room, step away from the situations. Use strategies that they can have in their tool belts to manage these big emotions, and explain to them that once the emotion, that 90-second rule, once the emotion passes, it's their thoughts that are fueling the prolonged distress that they're feeling. And if they understand this and they understand that they ultimately have control over that feeling, whether it's feeling left out and sad, or left out and disappointed, or feeling frustrated because they've experienced a setback or a failure, or they're angry because they don't have something that they want. But understanding that once the emotion passes, recognize what they are telling themselves to keep this going, it can make them feel very empowered over the situation. And we need to have open communication, right? Open communication, one of my answers to every problem. But we need to create this environment where we talk about our emotions. It's okay. It's okay to feel sad. You're supposed to feel sad. It's okay to feel disappointed. It's okay to feel frustrated or jealous or angry. It's okay to feel those things. Be able to talk about your own feelings, talk about their feelings, be open about these emotions without any type of shame. So I hope that y'all have been able to get something out of this conversation today, because I know that it's something that I like to think that I'm doing all the time, and I like to probably to try to be aware of. But I know, I will admit, I have even caught myself telling my daughter at times to calm down. And I'm like, oh my God, I hate when my husband says calm down, because it doesn't calm me down. It only makes me angrier. But then you're also wrapping the stories about how the words calm down, they make you mad. And why would he say this? And does he think this little of me? And does he belittling this problem that I'm going through? And he's very dismissive of my feelings. And you're spinning this story, and it goes on long past 90 seconds. And so instead, I think that if we can all be able to recognize this in us and have this, when you feel the sadness, let it be sad. It's okay to be sad. When you feel overwhelmed by something, let yourself be overwhelmed. If you have disappointment or frustration, or you're mad about something, it's okay to feel those things. Label them. Maybe give them names. I think I'm going to do that. I think that would be super fun. Just like in that movie, maybe give them little personalities, picture them in my head, but label them, recognize them, and let yourself cope and move on. Thank you so much for being here today and always, but especially today. I really needed this. Thank you for being here. If this show resonates with you, or this episode resonates with you, please share it with your friends, maybe even share it on socials. But that's the way that we're going to grow our community. Speaking of socials, right before this happened, I've been trying to be better about posting more on socials. I'm reframing me everywhere. But when you see my posts, maybe, give them a like. I would love if you gave them a little comment, because that'll kind of create more engagement and get more people to find us. Because I know what this community does for me. And I know the value of this community for you. And I know that it would give that same level of help and that same level of acceptance and feeling like they are part of something to others out there who maybe just haven't had the chance to discover it yet. Find me on socials, reach out, and until next time, be well and communicate.